If the Saints can't get Aaron Glen, where do they turn to? Is the locker room shifting towards Darren Rizzi? And what's the latest on Mike McCarthy? We'll talk about all that right here on the Straight Up Saints podcast.
You're listening to the Straight Up Saints podcast.
What is up, Who Dat Nation? Welcome back inside another edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast. I'm your host, Chris Rosvoglu, and as always, the Straight Up Saints podcast is brought to you by Scott McNair Injury Lawyers. If you've injured any kind of accident, car, truck, 18-wheeler, or hurt offshore, Scott McNair handles it all. You give him a call at 504-500-1111 for a free consultation. They'll always fight for the win. The Saints have not decided who's going to be their head coach yet, and frankly, they can't do much in the search right now because it is snowing in New Orleans, and although that isn't convenient for a team that's running a head coaching search, it is pretty awesome in terms of getting some pictures because, man, some of the images that I have seen on social media the last couple of hours have been flat out amazing. But for New Orleans, it does actually complicate matters, right? When you can't get in or out of the city at the moment, how are you going to conduct a search which involves people coming in person, which was going to be the case, right? Whether it was Mike Kafka, Anthony Weaver, Mike McCarthy. So that's a problem. And for New Orleans, on top of that, you were supposed to meet with Aaron Glen this Wednesday. And if I had to guess, that ain't going to happen. But more importantly, is Aaron Glen going to even be on the table? Because there's a chance he could be off the board. So put it this, from right now, nothing yet has been done with Aaron Glen. But there's been a ton of smoke surrounding that situation. Reached out a couple of people. As you guys know, I am a New York guy. So reached out a couple of people regarding the Jets. They think it's going to get done. It's a matter of whether it gets done tonight, maybe tomorrow morning. I'm not saying for certain what the timeline is going to be. But most people that I reached out about 4 of them. One of my good buddies who's been reporting on the Jets for about 2 years now. I think this is going to materialize. I do believe Aaron Glen's their guy. Now, if Aaron Glen is their guy, I think that's going to cause a lot of discourse about, are the Saints just a horrible look now? Does no one want to coach there? I can't say that for certain. What I can say, though, it's very clear that coaching circles, and in particular this cycle, there are domino effects. And when Ben Johnson goes to Chicago, which already has a GM in Ryan Poles, the domino effect of that is this. Aaron Glen could, in theory, if this ends up getting done, go to the Jets where they hire Lance Newmark, who is the assistant GM for the Commanders, who had years upon years of being a front office guy with the Detroit Lions. He can be that GM with Aaron Glen. And it's not to say it's a knock on Mickey Loomis or whatever, but if you're Aaron Glen, you kind of be in symmetry with that GM and you come in at the same time. When you have two people like that and you arrive at the organization in the same moment, I think that's a clean way of doing things. Now, could you say that's a knock on the Saints? All right, fine. You could. If you want, you can. I think it's more of a domino effect thing. I think it's Ben Johnson goes to Chicago. That opens up the door. So we'll see what happens. Now, I know they said Aaron Glen left the Jets facility just now. Adam Schefter reported it. It doesn't seem like Jets people are backing down from it, though, whether it's Connor Hughes, whether it's Zach Rosenblatt, Benjamin Albright's been talking about it. There's a lot of people who still expect the deal to get done. And I think now, too, because that Saints visit seems to be on hold, this gives more leeway. So we'll see. I still would love for the Saints to get a visit in here. I've made it very clear. I'm a big, big fan of Aaron Glen. But this doesn't mean a deal won't be reached, though. Maybe it gives us a sliver of hope, and it definitely means that he's still available. But this doesn't mean that he's still, the window's completely open. I still think there's a very good chance he goes to the Jets. And again, I'm not saying that this is an indictment on the Saints. I think this is Ben Johnson goes to the Bears. This opens up the door for him to unite with Lance Newmark, and we'll see. So that's where we're at with Aaron Glen. I don't know if anything's going to change. Yes, he left the facility today. Could still get a deal done tomorrow morning. We'll see what happens. But obviously, that's something to keep an eye on. Now, another thing to keep an eye on. What the heck's going on with this Darren Rizzi situation? If Rizzi doesn't get the Saints job, he's probably going to be one of the most sought-after coordinators in the league. I would say Chicago, which is mentioned as a landing spot. Denver, they fired their special teams coordinator after that playoff game against the Bills. You got to imagine the reunion there with Sean Payton makes a ton of sense. But he's getting looked at in two different spots. Technically, he's getting looked at with the Jets, but we know he's not going there. Aaron Glen's kind of been the coach that they're circling in on. When Alvin comes out today and says, his vote for head coach rhymes with Fizzy, which is him saying he's going and giving his vote to Darren Rizzi, I saw a lot of people got up in arms about that. A lot of people seemed really frustrated with that. Maybe you can make an argument that you don't want complacency. You don't want the similar faces. For me, I'm not surprised at all that Alvin Kamara's backed him. Cameron Jordan was joking around with that tweet from Alvin. I'd imagine he'd be okay with Rizzi being back. A lot of Saints players advocated for Rizzi towards the end of the season. Foss Moreau talked about how great he's been. Derek Carr expressed support for him. I'm not surprised. And for anyone who gets really frustrated with this is the best analogy I guess I can put it. If you have a really, really, and I don't mean this like to as a person, more so as a coach for Dennis Allen. If you have a crappy boss or you feel like you're not getting on the same page with your boss and that guy gets replaced and the next guy comes in and all of a sudden the vibes are better, you just feel like it's a healthier work environment, you're probably going to be a little partial to that next guy coming in. And that doesn't mean that Darren Rizzi can't do the job well or that makes him the perfect fit. But we see this in the NFL all the time. When the Raiders fired Josh McDaniels, they brought in Antonio Pierce as the interim, and every player from Max Crosby to the guys on the practice squad were like, hey, we got to go and keep Antonio Pierce. We want him to be the coach of the future. Now, Raiders in that case, they went for it. We'll see what happens with the Saints. But I do think it's not a surprise that players would like to have Rizzi back. There's a known there. They clearly have a connection. They respect his messaging. And all I could say about this is because I think Darren Rizzi would be the hire that would get fans the most. I don't know about the most because Mike McCarthy seems to cause a lot of speculation on social media, but he would be one of the few hires that would aggravate people, at least from what I'm seeing on Twitter and all that. I think for the Saints, hire the guy who you believe for the next 3 years. If you hand them the keys to the franchise, they're going to get you back on the right track. Because you can't, in my opinion, you cannot hire a coach where if shit hits the fan after year one, you're firing them. You got to have a little patience here and see if you can make some progress. If you hire Rizzi because he had the best presentation and he has a plan top to bottom, which Nick Underhill reported days ago about this and said like Rizzi really impressed in meetings, then I'm all for it. I don't think the player stuff's going to matter at the end of the day. I mean, Mickey Loomis pretty much told the Saints last year, hey, you're stuck with Dennis Allen whether you like it or not, and they didn't want that. So just because they're advocating for Rizzi doesn't mean he's going to get the job. I do think it is fascinating, though, that Rizzi has this much support within the building. I think it's telling about the type of guy he is, but I don't know if he will get the job. If I had to guess, though, if Aaron Glenn is off the table, and he's not off the table yet, but we'll see what happens. It seems like the Jets really made a strong impression, but that deal has not been done. I think Rizzi's got to be one of those options for New Orleans. Obviously, Mike McCarthy will be in the mix. I'd imagine Joe Brady will also be in the mix, but we'll see what happens with Rizzi. I am not surprised in the slightest that the Saints locker room seems to be all aboard the Darren Rizzi train. So if Aaron Glenn is off the board, which has not been confirmed yet, but it seems like that is the popular destination, him to go to the Jets, and Darren Rizzi is not coming back, does this open up the door for the third guy, Mike McCarthy? I think Mike McCarthy is probably the most fascinating situation here for New Orleans because he's the anti-Dennis Allen when it comes to what the resume says, right? Dennis Allen's resume was a red flag, right? The Raiders' tenure, they didn't win any games. There was a lot of commotion behind the scenes. And yet the Saints still said, hey, second chance, we believe in you. Mike McCarthy, on the other hand, won a lot of games. Granted, hasn't won a lot in the playoffs the last couple of years, but you know you're going to get there with him. And anytime I say, I don't think hiring McCarthy is the worst thing in the world, I get absolutely dunked on in my comments, which to each their own. I have no problem with Saints fans dunking on me. I mean, I get dunked on more than enough times. But I think with Mike McCarthy, there's so much chatter about whether or not he'll be the favorite. And I don't know if he will be, right? I do believe that the Saints have interest in him. I do believe that the connection with the front office matters. And I think he is the safest hire that they can make. I think if you hire Mike McCarthy, you're not going to look like a sloppy football team in terms of, 4-13 next year. I just don't see it. He raises the floor. Is the upside there? Is it the home run pick, the guy that could maybe be your coach for the next 15 years? No, that's not going to happen. I don't foresee that at all. But I do think McCarthy does raise the floor. What I find so fascinating about this, though, is there will be people who want to give certain retreads a second chance and not others. And for Mike McCarthy, he hasn't really necessarily failed anywhere. If the definition of him failing is make the playoffs and get bounced early, I'm for that. I understand that, right? Like that, if you want to consider that a failure, that's fine, right? Mike Tomlin hasn't won a playoff game in 8 years now. John Harbaugh hasn't won 2 playoff games in a postseason since 2011, or what was it? Yeah, 2011, when they made the Super Bowl against the 49ers and won. So it's been over a decade since he's had multiple wins in a postseason. Those guys aren't getting fired, nor should they be. Mike McCarthy, on the other hand, gets all the smoke. And maybe it's because of maybe the personality, right? He's not as electric as a Mike Tomlin in the press conference or as consistent as a John Harbaugh. And I totally get that because John Harbaugh, one of the best in the business. I understand that. But Mike McCarthy is a damn good coach, in my opinion. I think the things that he would help the Saints with, you're going to get better quarterback play. And I said this today on Twitter, and some people said, hey, he's had Aaron Rodgers and Dak Prescott. Like, how can you say that? My argument would be this. Take the Rodgers stuff to the side. We're not, either you're going to give him credit for helping Rodgers get to where he got to, or you're not. That's up to you. It's not like he was coaching Rodgers at the MVP level from the get-go, right? There was development that went on behind the scenes. So it's up to you if you want to give him credit or not. If you don't, that's fine. Dak was a very good quarterback. I like Dak Prescott more than most people. His best seasons were with Mike McCarthy. He had an MVP caliber season with Mike McCarthy. And if you want to take Dak off the board and say, okay, what else? He has a 9-5 record with Cooper Rush. I think we're so anti-Mike McCarthy because he's not an exciting coach. He's just not, right? He doesn't have the fire of a Sean Payton. He doesn't have the fancy plays of a Kyle Shanahan or a Sean McVay. And he's not that kind of like flashy personality. He's just not. He doesn't look like he came off a GQ cover like Cliff Kingsbury. So I think that is a negative connotation for him for some unfortunate reason. But I do think if they were to hire him, and this doesn't mean this is not the reason you should hire him, but for anyone getting aggravated about the thought of him being the next head coach, just know if they did hire him, he would be the best head coach in the division. Now, that might be a possibility for other guys that the Saints may reach out to, depending on how they develop. But you can't sell me on Todd Bowles. You sure as shit can't sell me on Raheem Morris. And I think I like what Dave Canales is doing in Carolina. But let's see for another year if they can continue the growth that they had at the end of this season. So we'll see what happens with McCarthy. But I know he's going to get good production out of the quarterbacks. He just had a 1,000-yard rusher in Rico Dowdle. I think the running game would be fine with Alvin. Who knows? Maybe you draft an Ashton Genty. I'm not sure where the Saints will go with that pick. We'll see. I think Ashton will probably be on the board when they're picking number 9. But you know the offensive play will be better, and there is stability there. And maybe that's what the Saints want. I'm not saying that's what they should do. I kind of like the idea of the Saints swinging for the fences. But when you look at their list of candidates, Mike Kafka, huge question mark. We don't know what he would bring. Anthony Weaver, really well respected, but a huge question mark there. Joe Brady. I love the idea of Joe Brady. I mean, when I see the Bills run game in the playoffs, that excites the fuck out of me to think of a Saints team that could be smash mouth football, knowing that when Joe Brady's got to kind of get that passing game going, he can also do that. That's where his roots really stem from. I like the idea of Joe Brady as well. But there's so many question marks. I would not be surprised if Mickey Loomis goes with the safest pick because this should be the last time he makes a hire. If he gets this one wrong, there's no excuse or no reason, in my opinion, to let this guy get a third crack at the plate. I don't think you get that. I think when you whiff on Dennis Allen, if you whiff on the next coach, you don't get another chance to swing the bat, in my opinion. I think you got to go with someone else. So that could lead him to the safest pick. But I think all of it kind of stems with what happens with Aaron Glen and if a deal ends up getting done. Again, didn't get anything done yet, but that something could materialize in the future. So I've rambled enough. Let's get to any comments you guys have, and we'll go from there. So let's get into our John Deere Q&A presented by Sunshine, your hometown. John Deere, nothing runs like a deer. We're going to start off with, let's start off at the top here. Half-Life says, yeah, the players might want Rizzi, but I want to see something different because the last few games were more of the same. I totally get that. I think that is a very fair complaint. I think that's going to be the complaint for a lot of Saints fans, right? If they were to go with Rizzi, is that the worry? More of the same Saints football that we've kind of been accustomed to seeing. If I had to guess, though, judging off what Rizzi did when he was the interim coach, he made a lot of changes on the fly. I think he would kind of just start all over with the staff. I think he'd bring all new guys in. I do like the emphasis on like the soft muscle injuries and trying to figure that out. Again, doesn't mean he has my vote. I don't really have a preference. And I said this today, and I fully do believe it. I know some people will say, hey, you're just bullshitting me. I know it's a cop-out answer, but it's the truth. I just want whoever's going to get the Saints back to playing meaningful football in December and January, because not having that really fucking sucks. It really sucks seeing teams have playoff success, or if they don't have playoff success, there's a glimmer of hope that gets them excited for the next season. And us Saints fans are just kind of like, all right, I like Olave. Alvin's still a stud. Like, what else are you getting excited about, right? Like, it's not enough. So we'll see what happens. But I totally understand that comment about Rizzi. And, Paper Chaser here said it as well. No disrespect to Rizzi, but he's not it. We need new blood. I totally get that, man. I totally get that. Walltown Best says, breaking news, Glen left the Jets facility without a deal. Saints need to go all in. I would imagine that they are going to make a run for Aaron Glen if they can. But I don't know how much this kind of snowstorm here is going to complicate matters, right? Like, when can you get him in? Unless the Saints end up flying to him. Don't know. But we'll see. If I had to guess, Aaron Glen and Lance Newmark probably will spend the next 12, 24 hours, whatever, still chatting with the Jets, still working out something. And then if something can't get done or there isn't something on the table that makes sense at the moment, you start exploring your other options. And obviously Aaron Glen will have other options because he's been linked about just about every job this cycle, and rightfully so. But I think for him to go to the Jets first with the intention of getting a deal done, I still think there's going to be negotiations over the next 24 hours. Rachel says, does Rizzi go back to special teams? He will, but elsewhere. It won't be here. I think Rizzi makes a lot of sense for the Chicago Bears, right? Like, you have an offensive play caller in Ben Johnson. You're going to add DA. So, Dennis Allen will be the defensive coordinator. Rizzi and Ben Johnson have pre-existing connection, but I think you need that enforcer, and I think Rizzi could be that guy for them. Pelicans Nola said, did the Jets sign Aaron Glen, or is he on his way to Nola because Jets fans don't know? Not on his way to NOLA, at least not yet, and I don't know if that will happen, but also not signed. They are still talking. We'll see what happens, but that's kind of the latest. Xavier says, what do you make of the vets backing Rizzi? Are you okay with the hire? If they want Rizzi to be the guy, and that's on them, right? I'm okay with the players voicing that. I think there's nothing wrong with it. And most of the time, interim coaches are going to get the support. I mean, just look at the Raiders, right? When they fired Gruden and then they had Rich Bisaccia, all their players wanted Rich Bisaccia to be the coach. And then when they fired McDaniels and they made Antonio Pierce the interim guy, all the players wanted Antonio Pierce to stick around. So it's natural. It's kind of what happens. But I don't know. I think for Rizzi, I would obviously give him a fair shot. As someone tweeted, I actually laughed about it. They were like, you can vouch for these coaches, Chris, but we all know, like, at some point you're going to turn on them. I'm like, yeah, I'll give them an hour and then I'll turn on them. But I would give whoever gets the head coaching job a clean slate. And I would hope that all we get is some progression as the year goes on. But I do believe that Rizzi would be the hire outside of maybe Mike McCarthy that sparks the most debate online. We'll see, though. Half-Life says, it's crazy to think that the Saints were that close to Super Bowl 5 years ago yesterday. Now we're in shambles. The NFL moves quick. And what I would say about this is, right, because I said I want to see the Saints get back to meaningful football. And those teams that are playing meaningful football and have been for the last year or two, enjoy it while it lasts. Because that Lions game on Saturday against the Commanders, it kind of reminded me of the Saints. I'm not comparing them, right? Like, the Lions still have young talent, a lot of guys in their prime or not even in their prime yet. And that part is scary, right? Like, they should, in theory, be in the mix next year. But you never know, right? Because all the coaching staff has to be secure. And you got to have the right guys. And if you're Detroit, you're probably going to lose Aaron Glenn. You've already lost Ben Johnson. So there goes your coordinators. And injuries happen. Obviously, we saw this year with the Lions. So you never know when it's your shot. And even when you think it's your year, shit can hit the fan at the worst possible moment. So you're right. It is crazy. But I think us Saints fans kind of knew it. The problem is they've prolonged the inevitable, right? Instead of taking their medicine right after Drew, they try to compete, and obviously they're going to pay the price now. David says Saints players wanted Dennis Allen too. Yeah, I know defensive players definitely vouched for him. We'll see. Obviously, that didn't go very well. Rex said, if he left the building without a contract, means the Saints still have a shot, but I prefer Big Mike. I'll take 12-5 for three out of 4 seasons over 5-12. Man, I think for me, McCarthy's got the worst PR out of any good coach. And again, some people aren't going to like McCarthy, and that's fine. I'm not going to deny that. I think the concern is you're stuck in no man's land, right? They'll be good enough to maybe win an NFC South, but they won't be good enough to make a run. I get that. And if that is your concern, I'm not going to argue with that. But for the people that are saying, well, I don't think he's a good head coach, I don't know. I just don't know, man. Like, think about it. McCarthy leaves Dallas. Dallas is going to downgrade at head coach. I'm sorry. Like, that's the truth of the matter. They're most likely going to downgrade a head coach. And I just think this guy gets a really bad rap. Navar says, how is Harbaugh more consistent? Bro ain't won since 2013. Ray Lewis was playing last time. I would say Harbaugh is probably more consistent if you feel like they're a legitimate contender. Counter argument, and to your point, like I mentioned before, they haven't won back-to-back playoff games in terms of in the same, like they haven't won 2 playoff games in the postseason since their Super Bowl run. So to me, that's a red flag. But I do think Harbaugh's a little bit more consistent. So you could say that any way you want. I like Harbaugh a little bit better. But McCarthy's in the same boat, right? Like, you've won a Super Bowl. You should get more respect, but you probably haven't. Nat says, Mike McCarthy or Joe Brady, I want an offensive coach. I get that. I'm actually curious for you guys watching, right? Like, is everyone set on an offensive coach? Or are there people who, if Aaron Glen does make the trip to New Orleans, that's the guy that you want? I'm curious on that part. Because to me, it's such a difficult proposition. I think the easy thing to say is I want the best possible coach, best possible leader. But on the other hand, if you get a defensive coach and you get the right offensive coordinator as your hire, you're going to lose him to a head coaching job. Now, I know that was a concern after 2 weeks with the Saints, right? Dennis Allen's your head coach, or was, and Clint Kubiak had an awesome first 2 weeks. I remember everyone's like, oh, crap, we're going to lose Clint Kubiak now. Now they might lose him anyway because they don't want him, or Seattle hires him, and we'll see what happens, right? He's got interest around the league as an OC. But that is the concern. When you go with a defensive coordinator or a defensive head coach, and you finally get that offensive coordinator that you like, you're going to lose him. And it's hard to replace them. The Buccaneers have had really a great run here where they have gone Dave Canales and now Liam Cohen. But if they lose Liam Cohen to the Jaguars, which is on the table, division rival gets hurt. And yes, the first 2 OC hires for Todd Bowles have been great. Let's see if you can do it again. It's so hard in this league to sustain that kind of success, you know? Cody says Mike McCarthy gets a smoke because people either love the Cowboys or love to make fun of the Cowboys. I do think that's part of it. I also think at the end of the day, the situation with Mike McCarthy, I think he just doesn't get enough credit because he also had Aaron Rodgers. And my counter argument would be this. We got to be a little bit more fair when it comes to coach quarterback. When I think of Drew Brees and Sean Payton, I split it down the middle. I split it down the middle of where they get credit. But for Mike McCarthy, it seems like he gets maybe 20% of the credit for when the Packers were successful and Rodgers gets like 80% of it. All right. That's the way we want to go. That's the way we want to go. You know, I think McCarthy is a genuine good coach. And I know he's not going to be the most flashy guy. He's not going to win the press conference, but I think he's a really good coach. I really do. Maybe that's not going to sit well with some people, but I really do think he's a solid coach. Shane O'Mac says, what about McCarthy? What about what McCarthy did for Aaron Brooks? His numbers plummeted when McCarthy left. I think a lot of quarterbacks have had success with him. Rodgers obviously is you're going to take him out because he's great, but Matt Flynn had that like 1 to 2 game run that earned him a freaking fat contract from the Seattle Seahawks. Cooper Rush, 9-5 record with Cooper Rush. You know, we always love to talk about Sean Payton. I love Sean Payton. Obviously, I still do. Sean Payton had success, and we're like, oh, he could win with Teddy Bridgewater. He could win with Taysom Hill. He could win with Trevor Siemian, Jameis Winston. Yes, he could. I'm not denying that. So we're going to give him credit for that. And Dallas is 9-5 with Cooper Rush as their quarterback. Does McCarthy not get any credit for that? Like, that's all I'm just asking for people to be fair. I'm not saying that you need to be pro Mike McCarthy because you don't. You don't. You guys, you could want whoever you want a head coach. I am here to have a nice debate or see other opinions. That's what I want. If someone says, hey, Chris, I don't want Mike McCarthy, that's fine with me. I don't even know if I want Mike McCarthy. I just want us to be a little fair when we're having the discussion. Because if they do hire him, technically speaking, they will be getting a massive upgrade at head coach. I like the idea of McCarthy. The organization is trash. I want an established guy who could build the culture, not a head coach who comes from being a coordinator. I think that's fair. I think that's totally fair. And I think that is the debate. Home run? Do you swing for a home run? But Lord knows if you whiff, that's it. No more opportunities. Or you try to hit a double. It's a very, very fascinating play for the Saints here. We'll see what happens. We will see what happens, but that's kind of where you're at. I like McCarthy. I think that he would provide some stability to this team. But what is the goal? Is the goal for the next 3 years to rebuild this team and then hopefully get on schedule to be a contender? If that's the case, McCarthy's not the guy. He's not. Is the goal to fast track this thing as soon as next year because you're convinced that injuries are what derailed last season, which injuries played a part, but that's not the only reason why they were bad. Then all right, yeah, maybe McCarthy is the guy. But we'll see. Halfway says McCarthy reminds me of what Sean did in 2021 with the backup quarterback and did better than expected. There are similarities there, right? There are similarities. But one gets the credit and the other one doesn't. At least that's what it feels like, you know? And I just don't get it. I really don't. Xavier says, love Clint getting looked at elsewhere. He needs to pack his bag and go. I think Seattle's looking like an option. Mickey Loomis was pretty adamant, right, when asked about, like, hey, will you block coaches from going elsewhere? It was like, no, man. So I think they're ready for Kubiak to leave. But I don't know if he will get that Seattle job. He won't get the Cleveland one, obviously, because they filled that need. But we'll see. Let's keep it going here. DJ Trauma Gaming says, Mike McCarthy would be a fail for Loomis despite the results. A playoff appearance doesn't buy much goodwill. If you're bounced early, we need long-term growth. I'm okay with that answer. And again, that's actually the one for me where it's like, hey, if that's your take, I can get on board with that. My counter argument would be this. I'm not saying it's going to happen. If the Saints were to hire McCarthy and they somehow make the playoffs next year and they win a wild card game, get bounced in the divisional round, would you guys consider that a good season? Or would you consider that fool's gold? That would be my question. Because that's kind of where Tampa's at, right? Tampa's in a better situation because of the cap. And, I think they just got a more talented roster right now than New Orleans. But Tampa's kind of been in that spot, right? Like, they made the playoffs the last 2 years, but no one's really buying them to win anything, right? Like, yeah, they won a playoff game last year against the Eagles. And had they not had that Baker fumble on an end around this year against the Commanders, they probably beat the Commanders. And now, oddly enough, the Commanders are one game away from the Super Bowl because that's the way this sport works. I'm curious what you guys would think about that. What, to me, would that be considered success or not? David says players are like kids. They always want the substitute teacher. Sure. I mean, I know I wanted the substitute teacher when you're in high school and you don't want to actually work that day. I get it. Obviously not the case for Rizzi. He's going to put their asses to work, but I got the analogy. Captain Deluxe says any head coach the Saints will hire will be contingent on them accepting Derek Carr. I say go with Rizzi, draft O-line, D-line, and consider this upcoming season a rebuilding / throwaway season. All I will say is I don't want that in terms of if they're going to hire coach, I don't think this is what you meant, but if they're going to hire a coach to be like the de facto fall guy, think of David Culley with the Texans. That poor guy was pretty much hired to be the fall guy for the Houston Texans. They hired him for the 2021 season with a shit roster. The man went 4-13 and he got canned. And then oddly enough, they replaced him with Lovie Smith, who then went worse than 4-13. And then he got canned after one season. And now it's worked out. They've gotten DeMeco Ryans. Obviously, they got CJ Stroud. But I definitely don't want it to be like a throwaway year. I don't have any expectation for the Saints next year. I expect them to be bad. That would be my expectation. But I hope that whoever they hire, there is a vision in place for at least the next 2 seasons to see if there is progress. So we'll see what happens. Shane says Matt Flynn was on OTB with T-Bob and Jacob Hester. He raved about McCarthy and called him a hell of a coach. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. There's a lot of people that have raved about McCarthy. And I think for a quarterback perspective, he would be interesting. And I don't even know if this would be his preferred choice. I would guess he would want Derek Carr. But for people that like Spencer Rattler, the guy that probably would get the best out of him would probably be Mike McCarthy, if I'm being honest. Because if he made Cooper Rush look halfway decent and Spencer Rattler's got 10 times more arm talent than Cooper Rush, I'd imagine that he could do some stuff there. Xavier says, want whatever coach that's going to dump Carr for future success. That's been a popular take, and I understand it, man. I don't get the idea of keeping Derek Carr next season outside of the financial implications of it. I just don't get it. Rappaport says the Jets are bringing out all the legends to sign Glen. He left the building today without a deal. Yeah, I saw that just now too. Been keeping it open on my other screen just in case something breaks while we're on here. Don't expect it to, but just in case. But yeah, no deal done yet. Obviously, the sides are still going to be talking, but we'll see what happens. AG, Brady, Cliff. Here's the thing about Cliff Kingsbury, right? Because I know Cliff Kingsbury is another name that people have mentioned. If you're Cliff Kingsbury, why would you go to the Saints? And this isn't for me to knock on the Saints. It's not at all. There's reasons here why I say this. One, he's still getting paid a boatload of money from the Arizona Cardinals. So, like, for financial implications, he doesn't have to. But two, and this is the bigger one, Cliff Kingsbury's value is going to be tied directly to how the Commanders look with Jaden Daniels as a quarterback. Year one, smashing success. I mean, they are a win away from the Super Bowl. Jaden Daniels has looked incredible how good he's been. If you can continue to have success, and it doesn't even mean they have to make it back to the NFC Championship game next year, but if the offense is successful, he is going to get another head coaching job. And more than likely, he probably have his pick of coaching jobs. So he has the luxury of being selective. Ben Johnson was selective last year. Kingsbury will definitely be selective. And I think because of what he went through in Arizona, there's more reason to be selective, to know that you're in the right spot with the right draft capital, with the right roster construction, with the right ownership. So I get why people want Cliff Kingsbury. I totally get it. But I think he is going to wait, and I actually think it makes sense for him to wait. He didn't have a great tenure in Arizona. They did have that one good season where they won 11 games, but they got embarrassed in the first round of the playoffs. He's going to be patient, and he should be patient. I don't even think he's going to consider anything this year. Next year, though, if you're Kingsbury, wait, because who's to say that better jobs don't open up? Like, think about it, guys. If the Cincinnati Bengals miss the playoffs next year, Zach Taylor's gone. So if you're Cliff Kingsbury, I'm not saying they're going to knock on his door, but if they knock on your door and they say, hey, you want to coach Joe Burrow? Yeah, I think that's the job he would want. So he has the luxury of being selective. I get why people are mentioning him. I don't blame anyone for mentioning Cliff. He's had a hell of a season. He really has come along as a play caller, and he's got a great eye for quarterbacks, which is important. But he's going to be selective, man. He is absolutely going to be selective. Shane O'Mac says, Loomis said in his press conference he wants to turn things around quickly. There's your answer. Of course. But I do think that's more so like, GM speak, coach speak, that type of stuff. He's not going to tell you, hey, we're going to suck. But I'm curious to see. Like, the hire is going to tell you, right? If you're going for Joe Brady, let's say, have a little bit more patience, not expecting immediate results. If it's Mike McCarthy, a little different. Johnny says Rizzi with the right coordinators could be great. It's possible, man. I like Darren Rizzi. I think Darren Rizzi is a great leader. I think the locker room loves him. But yeah, it all comes down to the hires. His will be a little bit more interesting too, because you got to find the right play callers for both sides of the football, and we'll see how that goes. I think Glen wants an interview with New Orleans. I think Aaron Glen would want an interview with New Orleans if, let's say, the Jets are your preferred spot, and let's say the deal's just not right, or they're not willing to budge on something. You should definitely want to talk to New Orleans. He should want to talk to the Saints anyway, because I do think the Saints, everyone's shitting on the Saints, and I get it. I shit on the Saints, more than enough times, but pretty weak division. They do have a good owner, regardless of what, we might get frustrated with. But I think Aaron Glen clearly did tip his hand. Like, it's the Jets who he wants to go to. Will he end up getting the job? We'll see. We'll find out. I think fair enough. Linda says, worst case, Mickey waits till after the Super Bowl. The good coaches get higher than Brady and more. Just say no. Rizzi gets pissed and leaves because Mickey tried to place him 4 weeks. Saints end up with a trash coach. Yeah, that would be the worst case scenario, right? Waiting. Teams have waited in the past. I think just like 2 seasons ago. Yeah, 2 seasons ago, Eagles make the Super Bowl. Shane Steichen, he waits. People wait. The Colts waited for him. And obviously for that season, it was kind of a 2-for-1 because it wasn't just Steichen. He goes to the Colts. And then you have the Arizona Cardinals who go after Jonathan Gannon. So we've seen people wait, and it wouldn't be the first time that happens. You would have to get assurance from that coach. And I'd imagine the Saints would try to get assurance from that guy. T5 the Great says, I liked Kubiak at first, but he doesn't know how to pivot like when Taysom got hurt. I think that the lack of second half adjustments, stuff like that's kind of what bothered me. Half-Life said good season. Oh, in regards to McCarthy, because we haven't been close in a while, probably depends on if we if we contended or got blown out. Yeah, I think, look, that's going to be the thing. If they hire Mike McCarthy, they're probably gunning for the NFC South again. I know people won't like to hear that. But yeah, like what is acceptable? Because there are certain teams that I think just kind of make the playoffs just for the shit. Like, you make the playoff and that's it. Like, there's no actual threat of winning a Super Bowl. I'd argue the team that the Saints compare themselves to, the Pittsburgh Steelers, are in that boat right now. You know, next season they're going to go above 500, but they're not going to win anything when it matters. So it's kind of where you're at, unfortunately. Danny says we need to get with the program and hire a new and young and draft a young quarterback. I don't mind the first suggestion, Danny. The second one, though, like, who are you drafting and where? I think the Saints have so many openings on this team and positional needs. The way I look at it is I would love for the Saints. Now, they got to start hitting their fucking picks, right? Like, they have whiffed on way too many picks. But you got to start hitting on your picks. But I would like for them to spend, let's say, just this draft, get 2, 3, fuck it, maybe even 4 impact players that all of a sudden there's less positional needs going into next year. So when you eventually take that quarterback of the future, you're not telling him, hey, I need you to completely save the franchise, right? He's coming into a good situation. Quarterbacks that go into shit situations, 9 times out of 10, they end up flopping. And yeah, you might have a guy who strikes lightning. I would say Joe Burrow did a great job year 2. They make the Super Bowl. But even then, when you don't have the right support, and we would know because we've seen it with Drew, it's hard to win this league. You have a Hall of Fame quarterback, and if the support system's not there, you're not going to win anything. So I'm a little hesitant about them drafting quarterback this year because my concern would be, is it too much too soon for a guy with no experience? So I just want them to get good football players. You know, when people ask me, hey, who would you want at 9? If Mason Graham's there, if Ashton Genty's there, if Will Campbell's there, I do not care who they get. Like, get a good football player. Get a guy that you know when you draft him, hey, we're a better team now. Like, immediately a better team. Yeah, the Raiders took Brock Bowers, and tight end's not considered a premier position. Raiders got better because they got Brock Bowers. Yeah, maybe he didn't show it in the record column, but you know that dude's an all-timer. He already has the makings of an all-timer. So that's what I'm hoping for. That's what I'm hoping for. So we'll see what else, goes on here with New Orleans, but that's kind of where I'm at when it comes to the draft situation. Ed says Kingsbury needs to wait another year or 2, then he'll be the top coach. I kind of feel the same way about that. Just be selective. Like, you have the luxury of coaching. Maybe I'm jumping the gun here. A top 5 quarterback in the league right now with the way Jaden's playing. Like, Jaden looks fantastic. He's always, calm. The dude plays like a 10-year vet already as a rookie. He could be selective. Ed says Joe Brady and bringing Robert Saleh as defensive coordinator. On paper, I would love that. Downside is I think Robert Saleh, it seems like he's either going to get the Jags job or go back to the 49ers. So I don't think they'll be on the table. Xavier says, think we could maybe steal Fields from Pittsburgh. My guess is no. I think if you're New Orleans, it's either start Derek Carr, or if the coach likes him, start Rattler. I just don't think it makes sense to go after Fields. And the reason I say that is, like, the Saints they're going to need to spend some money. It's not like they're not going to spend any money. They're going to spend a little bit. I don't know if you're going to spend $7-8 million on a quarterback and hope you have the next, reclamation project. And maybe that is what Fields will do, right? We've seen it with Darnold, seen it with Baker, seen it with Geno. So maybe. I'm not anti-Justin Fields. I just don't know if that makes sense for them. If you're going to take a shot on a young guy to be the next quarterback, why not try to see? We've seen some good halves of football from Spencer Rattler. Maybe you get the coach that ends up getting you 2 good halves and getting you a complete game. So that's why I probably lean towards no. I also think Pittsburgh kind of actually wants to keep him. I think if they move on from someone, they're more likely to move on from Russell Wilson. There have been some rumblings about Arthur Smith preferring to coach Justin Fields, but the Steelers wanting to play Russell Wilson. So I wonder, maybe they just go with Fields next season. So my guess is no, but I get it. It's been a popular take so far. Danny says, I think the game is evolving and the Saints need to change as well. And that's getting a mobile quarterback. I mean, look around the league right now. Look at the 4 quarterbacks in the playoffs. Mahomes, wouldn't call him a runner, but he can beat you with your legs. And the funny thing is, Mahomes in the playoffs has back-breaking runs all the time. Josh obviously kind of looks like Superman when he's running. Jaden, he's going to use those legs on you. And Jalen's kind of become almost like a power runner the last couple of weeks. Chase says, I think Darren Rizzi can be a head coach. I think it's possible, man. I think it's possible. Danny says, ew, the Jets. Aaron Rodgers got all them coaches fired. This man will lose his job in 2 years. Oh, in regard to Aaron Glenn. Yeah, look, the Jets are a scary spot, right? Like everyone talks about their roster and they have talent, but I've seen way too many coaches get fired. Go to the Jets as a wasteland, right? So like after Rex Ryan, it was Todd Bowles. And after Todd Bowles, you bring in Adam Gase. And after Adam Gase, the fuck else did they bring at this point? I'm losing my mind over here. But even Robert Saleh, like kind of a wasteland. Jeff Ulbrich as the interim coach, no success. So we've seen coaches go to the Jets, whether it's offensive or defensive, and being hyped up. And, when they hired Saleh 4 years ago, it was a similar situation to Aaron Glenn. He is the very popular defensive coordinator candidate. Everyone loved him, and it didn't work out. Now, I do think Aaron Glenn's a better leader. I love Saleh, but I think the way people talk about Aaron Glenn's a little bit different than the way they talked about Saleh. And I would wish well for Aaron Glenn because I think Aaron Glenn deserves this opportunity. I think it'd be pretty cool. Played for the Jets, had a couple Pro Bowl seasons with them. It'd be a really nice reunion. But every time that people tell me, hey, the Saints have the worst job, I'm like, can we be fair around the league? The Raiders are a bad job right now. The Jaguars are a bad job right now. The Jets are a bad job. The Cowboys, if Jerry is that stubborn with everything he does, that's not a great job either. So the only real good job, in my opinion, and people might be shocked, I thought the Patriots one was a decent one because, they've had stability for the most part. Even the Bears kind of seem cursed. I know they got their guy in Ben Johnson, but not a lot of good jobs out there, man. And there's a reason why they're open, Rachel says, I think the Saints should hold open coaches interview and hear what people have to say. I know fans would love that shit, right? But I think the problem with that would be it'd become a whoever wins the press conference wins the job. Ed says last place schedule, maybe with the right coach and some luck, who knows what could happen. I'm going to wait to see who they hire and how they handle the draft and free agency and whatever, although I don't expect them to be really busy in free agency. But I think if they got the hire right, I would not be surprised if they were more competitive than people think. A lot of people are ready for them to be 3-14. And from a draft standpoint, that would be good for the Saints, right? You get your quarterback if that's what you decide to go for. I don't know, though. I don't think that's going to happen. And we'll see. But I'd love for them to have a competitive year. You guys, I've said it so many times with you guys. Yes, I have fun ranting sometimes, but I want to watch good football. I want to get excited about it. Like I want to have I want to have a pregame, halftime, postgame show in mid to late January because there's a playoff game going on for the Saints. Linda says just want an offensive line that can protect the quarterback more than 2 seconds. And don't get me started on the medical staff or the scouting staff. Yeah, those are concerns for me as well. Don't feel confident about either one. Just don't. But yeah, I mean, look, need to get better offensive line. I think the hope is Eric McCoy obviously is your guy in the center, but he's got to stay healthy. You like what you saw from Fuaga. He seems to be a foundational piece. Can Penning take another step? I thought Penning did a really good step this year, right? Because they have taken Penning from can't see the field to he can start 17 games. There's going to be struggles, though. Now, can you minimize the damage of how consistently he struggles? That's the next step. Think he has success at times in the run game. Obviously, pass protection has been a little uneven. But if you can do that, all right, I like 3 starters now on the O-line. Got to figure out the guard play. I think that is what concerns me. Revolving door at left guard. And then right guard, I mean, let's be fair with Cesar Ruiz, man. That deal is not aged well for the Saints. Ed says, keep Chase Young, ? I would at a cheap price. I agree. Would at a cheap price or would if the money is right or if it's not a long-term thing. I think Chase Young, if the Saints want to go a little expensive for 1 year with incentives again, I'd be cool with it. But I don't want them to go long-term with Chase Young because I still think there's questions about whether or not you're gonna end up regretting that contract. I think that could be a guy that you give him a long-term deal. You might end up regretting it, whether it's injuries, whether it's inconsistencies, motor issues. That can concern me. But if they bring him back, I thought Chase Young played well at times. I think there's inconsistencies with him, but they need guys on the D-line. Counter argument would like to see them draft guys, would like to see them give guys like Isaiah Foskey a chance. But who knows, man? Maybe Foskey's just not a player. Maybe he's just not a player. And if that's the case, all right, then we got to figure it out. But I think for the Saints, Chase Young's going to be interesting. Chase Young, for example, though, and this is where, like, I don't know what to make of him. He had 10 more quarterback pressures this year than he did the year that he won Defensive Rookie of the Year. But it didn't feel like the impact was that great. And I still think he could be a great player, but it feels like he's a split second away from making the game-breaking sack, making the big, game-changing play. Can you get that out of him? Look, the Saints need players, so I'd be cool with it. But that is my question with Chase Young. Can he end up doing that? And I just don't know. Ed says Cesar Ruiz was out of position. He really was a good college center at Michigan. I thought the same. I thought he was a very good player at Michigan. But the Saints had this phase where they were kind of just drafting guys and moving them out of position. And unfortunately for him, he's kind of been the next victim of that. Half-Life says the MVP of almost making plays in regards to Chase Young, I'd give him one more year to see. Yeah, if the money works, I'm cool with it. Like I said, Saints need dudes. They need dudes, right? Like, even if you want them to go 2-15 because you want them to draft whoever your preferred quarterback candidate is for next year, whether that preferred quarterback candidate is Arch Manning, whether that preferred quarterback candidate is Drew Aller, whether it is Nico, whoever it might be, you might want that, but this team's got to go out there and field a competitive team. So bringing Chase Young back would help in that regard. MVS said he agrees with Rizzi being coach. Wonder if he wants to stay. I mean, I would like them to bring back MVS. I mean, we'll see what happens with the Rizzi stuff, but I think MVS was one of the few guys that they're playing late in the season that it's like, I know you're an NFL caliber player, so I would like to see. Interestingly enough about Marquez Valdes-Scantling, which would be kind of funny if they do end up keeping him, depending on who that coach may end up being. Like, I'm not saying this is a given, but let's just see if they bring him back. I think he could be a really good wide receiver 3, maybe 4, definitely 4. But I think you could have a little bit more explosive element. And worth noting, I believe his rookie season, Mike McCarthy was the head coach. So if the Saints end up going that route, I'm sure his decision won't be tied to who that coach is. It's more of a fit thing. Saints gave him a chance. He does know Mike McCarthy's system, so who knows? Maybe if they end up hiring him, that's what they'll bring back. Ricky says, wait, is it confirmed that he's the head coach for the Jets? It is not confirmed. They're still working on a deal. Nothing has been finalized yet. A lot of smoke about him being off the board. So in regards to that first topic, if you're just joining, you see, Aaron Glen off the board. I should have put an if. I do apologize. That is definitely on me. Ed says, watch the Saints draft like Quinn Ewers. I could see them doing some dumb crap like that. Yeah. I mean, when does Quinn get drafted? I think that would be for me, when I'd be less annoyed. I just don't see the ceiling with Quinn, though. Like, I think he makes some good reads, but if I'm being honest, I think if it all works out for Quinn Ewers, I think he ends up being another Derek Carr. Good throws, not a bad quarterback at all, but doesn't elevate the ceiling of the team. And I think that is what would kind of concern me. But, I don't know. I think his first year at Texas, I was probably more optimistic about him. Second year, I was like ready to just get off the bandwagon because I didn't see enough pop. And then third, this past year, I don't know. I just haven't seen enough to get excited about him. Half-Life says it would snow here when AG would be coming down. Bad timing. It's awful timing. It's awful timing. The only thing that helps the Saints is if let's say they can't get Aaron Glen, he goes to the Jets, and they're okay with that because they like their other options. Mike McCarthy's not interviewing with any other team right now. Joe Brady is focusing on the AFC Championship game, so you got time there. Cliff Kingsbury's focusing on the NFC Championship game. You got time there. Anthony Weaver is not, at the moment, a hot candidate for anyone else. Neither for Mike Kafka. So five other names that are linked to the Saints. You still got their chance there. Aaron Glen's the one where it's like, oh, fuck. Like, it might screw you over. But you still got an opportunity with the other coaches. When are we getting a draft video? Want to hear your perspective on who we take number 9. I don't know, actually. Definitely earlier than usual. Sometimes I wait till like April. I'll probably do one maybe. Let's see who they hire as head coach, and they'll go from there. I will tell you this, though, guys. If they were to get Joe Brady, I would love to see them draft Ashton Jeanty at 9. Reason being is if you watch that run game with the Bills, it is explosive. They do a good job of interchanging backs. Could you imagine like Ashton Jeanty and Alvin like in that run game? Like that's the way to get it going. On the flip side though, Saints need defensive line help. The guy that I would love to see on the Saints is not going to be there, right? Like my perfect world would be if somehow, some way, Abdul Carter fell to the Saints, but he's not going to. That guy's going top 5. He's a fantastic player. But McMillan will be an option for them. Will Campbell will be an option for them. We'll see where they go. They'll have options. Ricky says, I want us to get Rizzi or Brady if Glen is gone. Also want to cut Carr and see how Rattler does with the full roster. Yeah, I think, I'm kind of on board with the second part, man. Like, we know who Derek Carr is. For better or worse, we know who Derek Carr is. We don't technically know who Spencer Rattler is. And the odds are Spencer Rattler is much worse than Carr. That's what the odds would lean towards. But I kind of like that unknown regard. Ed says, New Orleans crying over a little snow. Chris, you're from New York. This is nothing to you. Yeah, okay, but I will say, you're not wrong about the nothing to you part. I will say it's a little different in the respect that, like, when you're from New York, if it snows, you got plows ready to go, at the drop of the first snowflake. Everyone and their mothers has, 10 shovels in their garage. So the preparation stuff's a little different, and obviously this isn't ideal. I will say though, there's a couple of shots of the French Quarter covered in snow, and that might be one of the most beautiful pictures I've seen in the last couple months. And even the Superdome outside with snow around it looks pretty sick. Steel Bill says Saints need to draft BPA instead of need. That's what gets them in trouble in the early rounds. Couldn't agree more. Get a good football player, because if we're being honest, you can make an argument the Saints have a need at just about every position. I would argue they don't have a position that you should feel great at. Maybe if you really feel good about Trevor Penning's potential and development, offensive tackles off the board. Outside of that, they can use a guard. They can use a running back. They can use a receiver. They can definitely need some help in the tight end room. You can use a defensive lineman or 2. Defensive tackle, obviously, they got to figure out, which is why I'm stressing on at least 2 defensive linemen. Safety, they need a new safety. Corner, you can use some corner help. So we'll see. That being said, Will Johnson and Jeanty there. Who do you take? It's a great question. Great question. Oh, God, I love both players so much. I love Will Johnson. I think Will Johnson's like a blue chip prospect. If they bring back Paulson Adebo, I think I would go Ashton Jeanty, because I think this offense needs juice. It needs juice. And for anyone that's like, hey, don't take running back that high. All right. I don't think the Lions are regretting taking Jahmyr Gibbs. 2 different running backs, right? 2 completely different running backs. But I think I might go Jeanty, but I love Will Johnson. If the Saints got Will Johnson, I'd be ecstatic. I would be ecstatic about Will Johnson. Will Johnson, to me, is the type of player that, yeah, he'll go 9, but he really is like a top 6 prospect, in my opinion. And, Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders, I think they're good prospects, but they, in my opinion, are not top 5 prospects. I think that Travis Hunter, Mason Graham, Abdul Carter, Will Johnson, I think those are better names. I think those are better prospects than those 2. But I get that quarterback's needy, so talent will fall, which would be good for the Saints. Ricky says if we get McMillan, that'd be huge. Also means depth at receiver. Yeah, they could definitely use depth. I would love for them to go out there and get themselves more help at that spot. Campbell from Bama would be the perfect replacement for DeMario. Wouldn't mind that at all. The question will be, can you trade up in the second round to get him? Maybe. That's the Saints' forte. I cracked up at Mickey Loomis saying like they like having multiple, they take on all the draft picks, right? It's not what they do, right? They like to make trades. DJ Trauma says, to me, the Bucs' success is not real success. Winning the worst division in football and making the playoffs to play 1 game isn't good enough. I understand it's a game, but we aren't as good as the Bucs. Yeah, look, I think that's the argument, right? What is considered success? NFC South is, I keep saying, it's a wasteland right now. So if you don't think it is helpful for the Saints to have that type of season, I'm for it. I understand. But I think that there are teams that probably grapple with that. What is considered success? Steelers going 10-7 and losing first round. Is that really successful? Guess it depends on the standard. I'd like for the Saints to aspire higher than that, but I don't know where they're going to end up kind of landing right now. Dr. Williams says, let Rizzi go. We need new in that building. We'll see, man. We'll see. Saints haven't made a decision. They're probably not making a decision for at least another week. Got to get through all these interviews. Got to see when you end up doing these interviews. But right now, going to look at Aaron Glen. We'll see what happens with the Jets. I think they're going to still try to work out a deal. If no deal gets done, then he'll pivot to the Saints. But Aaron Glen, obviously Mike McCarthy going to look at. You're going to look internally with Rizzi, Joe Brady, Anthony Weaver, Mike Kafka. Those will be the names. Regardless of what happens, though, we'll be here to cover it, whether it's an upcoming interview we didn't see coming, whether it's the final hire that gets done. We'll do more live streams, so be on the lookout for that. And then once they get the coaching hire done, we could kind of start thinking about what they'll shape this roster to be, because they got some important decisions to make. Regardless, though, we'll have it covered for you guys. We're right here on the Straight Up Saints podcast, the destination for the Who Dat Nation. I'll get to one or two more comments before I wrap this up, but I want to thank you guys again on this Tuesday night for stopping by and leaving your thoughts. Captain Deluxe says, do you think we can ever win with Carr? First round playoff win, second round, maybe first round. Second round, I'm going to say no. I think it really comes down to, having those gamers, right? Like, yeah, I know people are going to say, hey, Jalen Hurts ain't playing good quarterback right now. And he's not playing like a good quarterback right now. I totally get that. But they're asking him to manage games while having the best running back in the league next to him at the moment in Saquon. As for Carr, I don't even know if you can win one playoff game with him. I just don't. As for why they would keep him, I think it's strictly financial. If you told the Saints, hey, you could cut Derek Carr today, you ain't got to worry about dead money, you ain't got to worry about cap situation, I think this man, his ass would be cut tonight. In the snow, they wouldn't care. But you do have that contract situation that's pretty tough. Ricky says, I say we get Dylan Sampson. He's fantastic. I think he'd be a good late third, early fourth. Yeah, we'll see, man. Look, as we get closer to the draft, obviously we'll get there. I would love for the Saints to add running back talent, though. So I'm totally cool with that. I think they got to get better at the running back spot. Paul says, Brady or Cliff, that's who Loomis is high on. He definitely likes both. The problem is Cliff, I don't think Cliff's going to interview with them. Brady definitely is on their radar. There's no doubt about it, and people should keep a close eye. But I don't think they're going to be able to get a meeting done with Cliff, but maybe I'll end up being wrong on that. But guys, thank you so much for stopping by, tuning in, leaving your comments, your thoughts. Really appreciate it. We'll do more of these this offseason. This definitely isn't going to be a one-off. Saints got to make a coaching decision. They got interviews to get through whenever they can get to those interviews, and we'll have you covered here on the Straight Up Saints podcast. So one more time, guys, advise you, if you like our content here on the channel, subscribe to Boo Crew Media. It really helps out. And tune in for more content here on the Straight Up Saints podcast, the destination for the Who Dat Nation. Have a good night.